The road cut through the emptiness of the night, like a dark scar on the skin of the world. Jonas's truck roared over the asphalt, its headlights carving clearings in the thick darkness of the highway. He was already used to driving at night. The loneliness of the road had always seemed like good company. But that night, something felt different. The wind whispered through cracks of the cabin, bringing a cold that wasn't just physical, but an ancient warning, a call from the unknown. The silence was heavy, as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something yet to come. Jonas lit a cigarette and adjusted the radio, turning the dial in search of a station to break the oppressive muteness. But only static came through. A chill ran down his spine. He looked in the rear-view mirror and saw only darkness stretching behind him, an endless black cloak. He sighed and gripped the wheel tighter, tried to ignore the invisible weight that seemed to settle inside the cabin, a weight that pressed on his chest and made him doubt his own sanity. The BR 319 highway, deep in the Amazon, was famous for its stories. Veteran truckers talked about shapes wandering along the roadside, whispers coming from the dense forest, lights floating like ghosts above the asphalt. Jonas had never paid these superstitions much attention, believing the road was just a path and that the fears of others were the result of exhaustion and loneliness. But now, alone and surrounded by the wild night, he felt he might have been wrong not to listen more closely. The wind seemed stronger, howling through cracks of the cabin, as if it were ancient voices calling his name. A lump formed in his throat, and he tried to push away the bad thoughts, but then his eyes caught something ahead on the road, a figure, standing still on the shoulder, as if waiting for him. His heart raced. It wasn't uncommon to find travelers hitchhiking, but something about that silhouette unsettled him deeply. The way it stood rigid, as if it were part of the road itself. The way its shadow stretched unnaturally long, as if the blackness of the night was absorbing it. Against his own instinct, Jonas slowed down. The figure moved slowly, as if waiting for the truck. When the headlights illuminated its face, Jonas felt his stomach churn. It was a tall man, thin, with skin too pale for the region. His clothes appeared wet, dripping dark liquid that spread across the asphalt like a living stain. The trucker felt a sharp cold creeping up his spine. Something inside him screamed to keep driving, but his muscles felt frozen. The figure smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was twisted too wide, as if his mouth stretched beyond what was humanly possible. His teeth were thin, white needles gleaming under the pale light of the headlights. The radio crackled suddenly, breaking the suffocating silence. Distorted sounds echoed through the speakers, like overlapping whispers, voices without owners, speaking in an incomprehensible language. Fear grew within Jonas like a beast, an irrational terror tightening his throat and making his whole body shiver. He tried to press the accelerator, to flee from that insane vision, but his foot was paralyzed. The figure laughed, a guttural sound, echoing in the night like distant thunder. Then, without warning, it began to move, not walking, not running, but gliding across the asphalt, as if it had no weight, matching the speed of the truck. Jonas gasped, his eyes wide, his hands gripping the wheels so tightly that the knuckles turned white. This was impossible. Nothing human could move like that. Nothing alive. He looked ahead, forcing himself to stay in control, but then the truck started to lose power, as if something were draining its energy. The engine coughed, sputtered. Jonas cursed, banging the dashboard, sweating cold. The darkness around him seemed thicker, alive, as if it were closing in on him. Then the truck died completely. The silence was absolute. No engine sound, no headlights illuminating the road, just the impenetrable darkness and the sound of his own ragged breathing. The radio crackled again, but now with more clarity. Voices, many voices. Some were pleading, others laughed, some whispered his name. A deep shiver ran down his spine. The cabin door slammed. Something or someone was outside. Jonas didn't want to look, but he knew he had to. Slowly, he turned his head toward the window. There he was, the man from before. His smile now even wider, his eyes black as bottomless pits. He knocked on the window 3 times. Talk, talk, talk. Jonas felt the air leave his lungs. The skin on the back of his neck tingled with a primal sense of terror. His instinct screamed to run, but where? He was trapped inside his own machine, a metal prison swallowed by the nothingness. He tried to start the truck again, turning the key so forcefully that he nearly broke it. Nothing. The radio grew louder, the voices screaming in desperation. The man with the wide smile began to climb up the side of the vehicle, his long, thin hands digging into the metal with an absurd strength. His face appeared on the windshield, staring inside, as if studying Jonas, savoring the fear dripping off him like sweat. Jonas did the only thing he could. He grabbed his flashlight and turned it on, pointing it directly at the creature's face. For a moment, it seemed to shrink away, letting out a high-pitched, horrible sound like an injured animal. Jonas seized a distraction and tried to start the truck again. The engine roared to life. He accelerated, throwing the truck forward. Something detached and fell onto the asphalt, but he didn't look back. He raced down the road like a man fleeing his own destiny. He didn't stop until he saw a gas station ahead. The place was empty, but the lights were on. He stopped the truck and got out, still shaking. He walked into the convenience store, looking for someone, anyone. The attendant, an old man with a tired gaze, looked up from a counter. "You saw him, didn't you?" the man asked, his voice flat. Jonas hesitated. "What?" The man with the wide smile. His heart nearly stopped. "You know about him?" The old man nodded. "Everyone who passes through here knows. Some survive to tell. Others don't." Jonas felt his stomach churn. He looked outside at the empty road. The fear still enveloped him like a second skin. He grabbed a coffee, trying to steady his shaking hands. But deep down he knew it wasn't over. The road never forgets those who cross its limits, and he had been marked. The road continued to stretch ahead of him, an invisible thread cutting to the vastness of the forest, like a wound that never heals. Jonas tried to convince himself that what he had experienced that night was merely the product of his exhausted mind, a combination of loneliness and fatigue, an illusion from a man who had been traveling for too long without rest. But the eyes of the man with the wide smile were still etched in his memory, the guttural sound of his laugh echoing in his ears like an evil that crawled within him. He knew he was not alone. He had never been. Something was following him, something that could no longer be ignored. When he looked out the window of the convenience store, the darkness of the road seemed thicker, more tangible, as if it were alive, watching him. The old man behind the counter seemed to await the question Jonas had yet to ask. "Who is he?" Jonas finally asked, his voice hoarse, as if something were tightening his throat. The old man looked at him with an unsettling calm, as if he already knew this moment would come. "Do you really want to know?" he asked, his words simple but heavy with ancient weight. Jonas felt the fear growing in his chest, but something inside him forced him to continue. "Yes, I need to know." The old man nodded slowly, as if preparing a story he had told many times. "He's not human. He never was." He paused, his tired eyes growing dark. The man with the wide smile, he is the soul of the road. Jonas swallowed hard, trying to process those words. The soul of the road? The old man smiled, but it was a sad, bitter smile, as if he had seen too much. The BR 319 is not just a road. It carries the weight of everything that passes through it. Lost spirits, wandering souls, curses that take root in the earth. The man with the wide smile is one of these spirits. He feeds off fear from the loneliness of travelers and guides them to their end. Those who cross his path, if they cannot escape, become part of the road, trapped there forever. Jonas looked out at the dark road outside, and a chill ran down his spine. He felt the weight of those words, as if they had pierced deep into his soul. "And me? What happens to me?" The old man didn't answer immediately. He just watched Jonas with a heavy gaze, full of bitter wisdom that seemed to have been earned over a lifetime of suffering and loss. When he spoke, his voice was low, like a whisper that no one else would hear. "You've already been marked. There's no going back for you, young man. Once the man with the wide smile sees someone, he never lets them go. You will be hunted until the end of your days, until the road consumes you completely." Jonas tried to swallow the fear rising in his throat. He stood up abruptly, his heart racing. "But I left. I escaped. I made it. The old man shook his head slowly, as if lamenting Jonas's illusion. You may have escaped from him, but the road recognized you. It saw you, and just as it remembers everyone who crosses its path, it will never forget you. The man with the wide smile won't let you leave. He will follow you to the ends of the world, to the last corner you turn. Jonas felt the fear grow inside him, a primal terror tightening his throat. He wanted to run, to get out of there, but he knew it would do no good. He was already trapped. Somehow, he had become part of something he didn't understand, something older and darker than anything he had ever faced. Suddenly, the radio in the store began to crackle again, interrupting his thoughts. Distorted voices, indecipherable murmurs, as if they were coming from a world beyond his own. Jonas turned around, his eyes fixed on the screen, but there was no one there, just the static and voices that seemed to be calling him. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling. The old man looked at the radio, as if the sound were a familiar presence. It's not the first time someone hears those voices. They always come when someone is marked. They are the lost souls, those whom the man with the wide smile has taken to the road. Jonas took a step back, his body shrinking before the idea that he was surrounded by all those damned souls. And what happens to them? Do they stay there forever? The old man smiled bitterly. They become part of the cycle. The man with the wide smile feeds on fear, but also on pain. He nourishes himself in the loneliness of travelers, and thus these souls continue to wander, trying to find a way to escape, to save whoever can still be saved. Jonas felt a wave of despair wash over him. He couldn't understand how this could be possible, how something so evil and ancient could exist in such a modern world. But the fear he felt was real. He was no longer alone. Something was out there, waiting for him. "So what do I do now?" Jonas asked, his voice almost a whisper. The old man looked at him with deep sadness. "Nothing, my friend. There is no escaping what has already been sealed. You can only wait. Wait until he comes for you." The silence that followed was thick, as if time itself had stopped. Jonas looked out the window one last time, and then he saw it. There, on the road, under the faint light of the store, was the figure, the man with the wide smile. He was standing still, watching him. His eyes were black, deep like abysses, and his smile was now a twisted line of malice. Jonas felt his body freeze. He knew what he had to do. He needed to run, to flee, but he didn't know where. The old man seemed to read his thoughts. You can try to run, but he will follow you. The road never forgets. He never forgets. And then, before Jonas could react, the figure of the man with the wide smile began to move, gliding toward the store with steps that made no sense, as if time around him was stretching, like a viscous substance. Jonas took a step back, his body trembling. The old man just watched, as if he knew the choice had already been made. The man with the wide smile got closer, his eyes now fixed on Jonas, and the trucker felt a chill freeze his veins. There was no escape anymore. The road had called him, and now he was part of it. Jonas felt the cold sweat running down his forehead, his breath coming in short gasps, his body paralyzed by the paralysis of fear. He knew what he needed to do, but he couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on a man with a wide smile, whose steps dragged slowly, without hurry, as if time no longer had any meaning for him. The man's smile seemed to grow even wider, a twisted expression of pure pleasure in response to Jonas's terror. It was as if he had been made for this, to hunt and consume. The old man behind the counter, who seemed to understand everything that was happening, now watched with infinite sadness. He couldn't save Jonas, nor offer an escape. He had seen this before, countless times. "The road always collects its price," he said, his voice tired and resigned. "No matter how much you try to run, it will always find you." Jonas took a step back instinctively, but the ground seemed to give way beneath his feet. The sensation of being pulled into the darkness was so strong that he could hardly keep his eyes open. The figure of the man with a wide smile approached, sliding with an impossible fluidity, his eyes never leaving Jonas. The air seemed to weigh down, and the only thing he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat, each one echoing louder than the last. He tried to run, to do anything to escape, but his legs were firmly planted on the ground, as if the earth itself was holding him in place. He screamed, a desperate cry that reverberated off the walls of the store, but it was swallowed by the darkness. The street outside the window seemed to stretch on forever, and the man with the wide smile was now in front of him, his teeth white as blades cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, the man spoke, his voice a sharp whisper, like a cold wind passing through the skin. "You are mine now, Jonas. The road never forgets those who cross its limits." And then, in a brutal movement, he extended his hand, touching the glass of the window. An electric shock coursed through Jonas's body, and he felt unbearable pain in his head, as if his soul was being torn from his body. He wanted to scream, but his voice had been lost. The man's smile grew even wider, transforming into a macabre line of pure madness. Jonas could no longer distinguish where his flesh ended and the darkness began. His vision blurred, the world around him disintegrated, and all that remained was the black, eternal void of the road. He felt his body distorting, being pulled towards something much greater than himself, something much older. The road had marked him. He was no longer just a truck driver, but a wandering soul, lost forever. The old man behind the counter no longer looked at him. He knew it was too late. The road never forgives. And Jonas was now part of it, condemned to wander eternally with the others, trapped in the unchanging cycle it had created. The next morning, the drivers passing by the BR 319 would never see Jonas's truck again. The gas station was closed, but the wind still howled along the highway, as if telling stories of those who dare to challenge the road. And somewhere in the darkness that stretched infinitely ahead, the wide smile of the man still waited, eager to mark another victim, another lost soul, to feed on fear, desperation, and loneliness. The road never forgets. It always finds those who cross its limits.